Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining Sage's How to Do Research and Get Published webinar program today. Today's topic is how researchers can maintain the standards of good science in a world of misinformation, the people's case for curators. So do you benefit from the work done by information curators? Are you one yourself? Today, we'll talk more about the essential work done by curators in today's complex information landscape. Concerns about information overload, and misinformation get a lot of attention. Meanwhile, the very people in society who work to the standards of good science to uncover reliable information and share knowledge, and who protect the public's access to it, such as librarians, editors, statisticians, specialist journalists, and research professionals, are overlooked and undermined. Today's webinar will set out what is good curation or what good curation looks like, and the principles that underpin it. Principles that we as a society urgently need to make more visible, respected, and protected, so that we can continue to rely on them. You'll hear directly from public good curators and hear what you can do to build a public voice for good curation. The people's case for public good curators. Where did this come from? I'm going to launch a poll right now to get everybody's thoughts on this, just to kind of get us situated in today's conversation. So how positive do you think the outlook is for information neutrality generally? And with that, I'm very happy to pass over to our first speaker, Martha.
Thanks, John. I was taking the poll. Hi, everyone. So before I say much else, I want to introduce myself in two ways, actually. The first is me, as I normally would. Hi, Martha Afton-Dillian, Associate Director with Sage's editorial journals team. But also on the occasion of this topic, which brings us here together today, I wanted to introduce myself in my professional capacity as someone who for the last nearly 15 odd years of her career, has been charged with a fairly specialized, technical, you might even say, sort of sometimes mysterious expertise in the publicly interacting work of publishing scholarly journals. So, in other words, mine is a position that, however operational or at times unseen, is duty bound to the public and to those who operate between the public and scientific research, such as journal editors, researchers, learned societies and their members, and so forth. Who we are referring to here and henceforth today as public good curators, defined, as Sean said, as any professional appointment that helps members of the public access reliable information. So very shortly, you'll be hearing from some of the frontline public good curators and their perspectives. But I wanted to start by first taking us all the way back to what some might call the beginning, 1969, with this word that you will soon see on your screens. Sean, thank you. And the word is low. You may have heard at some point this almost mythical story of the internet's first word, low, so transmitted when the dawning message sent out on the ARPANET network crashed before it could fully spell out what was supposed to read login. That's it. I'm quoting here, lo, as in lo and behold, the internet, a musing from Dr. Leonard Kleinrock, who some of you might recognize as one of the central pioneering forces behind this historical moment. This event is, of course, not just the first word or even the first blunder uttered on the internet. It is in many ways a prime mover, the first of many, many more such miscommunications over the internet to come after it. Since then, science and society have been presented with communication challenges and, of course, opportunities that have shaped the information environment we find ourselves in today. Challenges that were deepened by several exacerbating factors, including many that you see on your screen, most recently a global pandemic, as well as a competing information environment, referring to misinformation, disinformation, AI deepfakes, even loss of local media, as well as radical innovation in personal computing, which has led to generational consumer technologies like Gen AI chatbots, content serving algorithms, blockchain, so on, just to name a few. These are challenges that alone individually would have shaken up public trust and confidence in societal institutions, but when combined, at a time when the very utility and utility of information is particularizing into powerful uses and in some cases misuses and abuses. Uh, the collective effects on institutions like science, like education, like research, scientific journalism, and all importantly, the people that comprise them is undeniably under fire. Which brings us from 1969, when that first law was uttered, to present day, or more precisely for our purposes, to 2 years ago, when Sage and Sense About Science locked arms with each other so that we can lock horns with these challenges. Uh, we together recognize a need for uplifting those individuals who are responsible for public access to credible information and the role that they play in shaping a healthy society. Said another way, curation and curators, and even more specifically, human curation with transparent processes, with standards, curation that stands contraposed to algorithms, which, among many other trials, create filter bubbles that serve information selectively behind sort of the opaque black box of kind of unseen AI anatomy. And speaking for Sage, as an independently held publisher in challenging times like these, we are very much animated by our mission to build bridges to knowledge. And our impact-driven sort of approach to speak up and to listen to those who keep and cross those bridges. In other words, public good curators and the public. So 2 years ago, Sage and Sense About Science set out to conduct a series of listening exercises with representatives from key curatorial caucuses, and from those discussions, we produced a report, a guide called "The People's Case for Curators." Uh, this document and its call to action seek to expose the important, often again unseen work of those public good curators, and through this improved visibility and mobility, earn the trust of an engaged public for whom they curate. Next slide, please, Sean. Thank you. But let's get a little more specific. Who are these public good curators? I won't leave you wondering for long. Public good curators are many of the people in this virtual room, you. Again, in the report, we define public good curators as those who work to the standards of good science to uncover reliable information and share knowledge, and who protect the public's access to it. That is all of you. And in other words, curators are credentialed people whose transparent and ethical curation of information can be a reliable North Star for people who are lost at informational sea. Their fixed and visible presence, a reliable guide, if you'll excuse the very long drawn out metaphor. And again, it bears repeating. That describes many of you. And for our guide, we primarily spoke with librarians, with specialist journalists, research integrity professionals, researchers, and editors. But if I can do anything with my time here, opening this up, it's to recognize those in this room who are serving in this vital function, and maybe even activate those who haven't recognized themselves as such. And this is, of course, the very thing that we are setting out to do with this guide. Next and last slide, please, Sean. Thank you. And so, so please, I'm getting a little bit ahead of us, but join us all in doing that very thing, in speaking publicly with your colleagues, with your bosses, about the importance of public good curation and uplifting public good curators for their stake in social wellness. With that, I could ask for no better next move than to pass the mic, so to speak, to one such public good curator, IFLA Director of Policy and Advocacy, Stephen Weiber. Thank you, everyone, for your time and for attending. Without much more ado, Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martha, for the floor, and thank you for the introduction. So, I am here representing these public good curators, librarians through the International Federation of Library Associations. Some of you may know our organisation. We're nearly 100 years old. We're primarily that space for helping, providing a structure for professionals around the world to come together to look for shared solutions to common challenges. And the provision of reliable information, support for researchers, for readers, for everyone to realize their right of access to information is at the heart of what we're doing. Um, Martha mentioned metaphors. I was trying to think of a metaphor for this and the metaphor for the role of libraries. And I came up with the idea that we are fluid dynamicists of knowledge, which I apologize for any fluid dynamicists who may be on this call where I'm going to get your profession and your area of focus horribly wrong. But crucially, to me, the logic of fluid dynamics, it's looking at how things flow, how things get from A to B. So it looks at how water, how liquids get stuck, how they overflow, how they get dangerous, and what we can do to make sure that we're channeling things as best possible, that we're making sure that we do things safely, effectively. So I'm sure you'll be able to judge if I've got the right metaphor here, if I should have chosen something else. Next slide, please. I think crucially within this, and again, it echoes very much what Martha's been saying. There is this greater awareness, I think, than ever before about how the flow of information from A to B is not simple. It's not as simple as we might have thought it was once upon a time. Now, to some extent, that is because we're just more aware than we used to be of the biases, of the risk, of the issues that may come up. Certainly, we are seeing this much greater awareness, including through technologies like text and data mining, of how things that we assumed were true were not, were just shorthands, were shortcuts, etc. for things. So there is that greater awareness of the biases that used to be there. But certainly, with the intrusion of technology, the coming of technology, it's simplified many things, but it's also it added in a lot more points of failure, a lot of places where things can go wrong, things can go awry. And so that transition, that flow is not as easy as it should be, it's not as simple as it could be. So we need to help people get through this. Next slide, please. And importantly, in looking at this, it's not just a question of the supply side. Of course, there's a huge focus on how can we make sure that we're producing the most valuable information, that we're going after people who are seen as sources of misinformation, of issues like this. But ultimately, this is a process where we need to look to intervene at every step along the way. The production of quality information according to high standards of ethics and publication is also vital. But looking at the algorithms, at what's shaping our experience, the fact that everyone sees a slightly different version of the internet when they log in because of their history, because of how they've been tracked, because of what's being displayed to them is important. Crucially, it's also about ensuring that the reader, that the person looking for information is aware of what's going on, that they have this curiosity, that they are equipped, because ultimately they are where the buck stops. They are where that they are where decisions end up being made. So we can't just focus on one side of things. Next slide, please. And I think flipping that argument around a little bit and just underlining a point that we shouldn't forget, the days are gone of being able to demand trust. It's no longer possible to stand up and say, "No, trust me, I am the definitive source of relevant information." And certainly, I think that's we are in a society where people are less automatically willing to give their faith, to give their trust in that way. Old authorities have been questioned, and to be honest, a lot of the time for very good reason. This authority, this trust has been abused. People have used it to say things, to do things that are just not right and not fair and not ethical. There have been mistakes that have been made honestly, but it doesn't reduce the fact that they are mistakes. And crucially, trust is more of it's a spectrum now. It's not between trusted or not trusted. It's the degree of trust. Where do you trust? To what extent should you trust? To what extent should you dig in a little bit further? Next slide, please. And that then brings to the role of libraries within this. And I've picked an image which is very much the old model of libraries, where the books are chained down because there wasn't a lot of trust in the user. People couldn't freely access things. You had to be given the work. It's a bit like previously in supermarkets, in shops, you weren't allowed to serve yourself. You had to ask for things. The same model goes with closed stacks and open stacks in libraries. And we found certainly in the library field that move away from the logic of being the gatekeeper, away from the idea that we are the ones who know what is good for you, towards a much more user-centered model that focuses on providing tools, on providing guidance, but underpinning that, it's building the confidence to be curious. I don't know, it's not my phrase, but it's a lovely one. The idea that libraries should be safe places to explore dangerous ideas. So making sure, getting to that stage where we can actually allow people to deal with the inevitable uncertainty that there is, the fact that there are contrasting views, things people may not agree, something may be disproved in future, but for all that, still feeling confident and engaging with information, ready to do that, ready to actually access information and use it effectively. To do that, there's a huge focus in the library field on the importance of ethics, on the importance of transparency, being people who you can go up and ask the question. You can challenge if something doesn't make sense, if you don't understand why it's the case, if you don't agree with it, because having that transparency is key towards building that confidence, building that role. Next slide, please. Of course, in doing that, a point that's worth making is that there is the risk that as libraries look to be seamless in the services that they offer, there's that risk of invisibility. And to some extent, that's valuable. No one wants to have someone looking over their shoulders. No one wants to have someone nannying them as they do their research, as they look to understand, they look to advance their ideas. So we need to avoid that. But of course, the effort to become seamless, especially when simply what libraries are often doing is providing access to a third-party platform. So we nonetheless need, and this is why it's so great that Sage and Sense About Science are doing this work, is to build awareness that even if success is not being seen, even if success is researchers feel that are able to go out to engage with information in the most effective way possible, it's important to advocate for that role, to underline that it is there, that it does really matter, and that it is making a difference by creating that environment where it's possible to be confident, where it's possible to be curious, where it's possible really to make the most of the information out there. So with that, I will then hand over. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Stephen and Martha. Very, very interesting talks. I'm Alice Meadows. I am at the moment an independent consultant, and I do some work for a new company called Open Research Ecosystem Consulting. My background is in scholarly publishing for many years, but about 10 years ago, I moved into research infrastructure, and particularly open research infrastructure, which you may or may not know what that is, and that's what I'm going to be talking a little bit about. But first I was at ORCID, which hopefully many, if not all of you, are familiar with, and then at NISO, the National Information Standards Organization, and I'm actually dialing in from their annual here, so hopefully there won't be any snafus, but it feels like a very good place to be contributing to this call from. So as the title says, I'm going to be talking about information infrastructure, curators, mostly invisible best friends. So picking up on, I think, a couple of the themes, Stephen, that you mentioned, which are invisibility and trust, both of which I think are really at the core of information infrastructure. So next slide, please. So I wanted to start with these quotes. I have to confess that I Googled inspirational quotes about infrastructure, and probably not surprisingly, most of them were about things like cities and traffic and stuff like that, and weren't really very applicable. But these, which are not talking about information infrastructure, I thought were absolutely perfect as a way of kind of summing up why information infrastructure is important. They're from somebody called Bruce Mao, who I have to confess I'd never heard of, but he is a sort of designer and design thinker, and I now want to go and read everything he's ever written. So the first is, most of the time we live our lives within these invisible systems, blissfully unaware of the artificial life, the intensely designed infrastructures that support them. absolutely the case in the information infrastructure. So, we all expect that when we click on a citation link, it's going to take us to the right place, for example. We don't really know or care how that happens. We just want it to work. And conversely, if it doesn't work, we get very anxious and cross about it, and it makes us annoyed. So, invisible, as Stephen said, is good, but it's also not good. We want to be invisible. We don't want to put up barriers, but we don't want people to not acknowledge that what's happening that's invisible is happening. And then I chose two quotes actually, because I also think the second one is very salient. So when everything is connected to everything else, for better or for worse, everything matters. And again, I think this is very true in the information infrastructure. If you have that citation that you click through to and it, for example, goes to a retracted paper, but you don't know that it's been retracted and that paper is out in the universe, again, that's going to cause problems way beyond the initial retraction. So I think these are two really good quotes for sort of summing up for me why information infrastructure is so important. Next slide, please. So I don't know how much all of you on this webinar know about information infrastructure, so I thought I'd just talk a little bit about the what, the why, and the how. As I say, it may be visible, in sort of everyday terms, that might be sort of buildings. In the research context, it's things like laboratories, equipment, archives, the sort of physical things. Or it may be invisible, which is what I was talking a little bit more about. So things like metadata and standards and digital repositories, what we often refer to as the plumbing, the stuff that you, again, just expect to work there in the background without having to worry about it. Why is it important for information curation? Well, I believe it's absolutely essential. You can't have robust, resilient, reliable information curation if it's not supported by a robust, resilient, and reliable information infrastructure. It enables transparency, it enables those trustworthy connections that we all depend on, it enables a lot of automated information exchange and much, much more. So really, really critical. And how? Well, there's lots of different sorts of infrastructure. I'm not going to by any means go through all of them, but I think in some ways there's sort of an important distinction to make is between open infrastructure, typically community owned, so there's a kind of shared responsibility for keeping them updated. And I'm going to go back to that citation example again. If your DOI link breaks, then you can report it either to the publisher or to Crossref, and they will fix it for you. It's a community responsibility. Proprietary infrastructures tend to be limited to people within or users of that organization. So something like a Scopus ID, for example, or a researcher ID, and the company bears responsibility then for making them as accurate as possible. But the two are not always mutually exclusive by any means, and the two, I think, do and should continue to exist together. We need both those types of infrastructures. Next slide, please. So now I think the important, interesting bit, I hope, for all of you is the who. And as I think Martha said, the who is you, in part. The who is all of us. And there are certainly, as researchers, your use of and support for the information infrastructure is absolutely critical. So I wanted to give you just a few examples of how you can literally make a difference individually. First of all, hopefully, as I said, many of you already have an ORCID ID. If you don't, I strongly encourage you to get one and use it as early in your career as possible. The reason for that is both selfishly for you, it means that you can have a record of your research career, basically, including your affiliations, your grants, your outputs, your service. You can really put pretty much everything onto your ORCID record now. But even better, can give permission to the organizations that, for example, you have published with or that you've been awarded a grant by to add that information to your ORCID record rather than you adding it yourself. And what that does is two things. A, it saves you time. But B, it makes that information trusted, because it means it's not just you saying, I got a grant from whoever. It's the funder saying, yes, we gave this person a grant. And you can see that on an ORCID record. There's a little sort of proper check mark that shows that that is validated information that hasn't just come from you as the researcher. Not that you're untrustworthy, but it's like a double verification, really, to have the organization involved also give that stamp of approval. And again, where possible, make information in your record publicly available, because that means that everybody can benefit from that transparency. Metadata and standards are another area that you have direct influence over. If you publish, typically you'll be asked to provide, for example, some keywords, make those as useful as you possibly can. If there are existing schema that you can use in your discipline, please use that. So really make the most of that side of the infrastructure and play your part in keeping it robust. And then repositories are another great option. You can make your outputs. You may or may not be able to make a final version of a publication, for example, publicly available. And there may sometimes be data sets that for whatever reason you can't make publicly available. But most of the time, most of your outputs can, and I believe should be made publicly available with good quality metadata so that they're also discoverable, attributable, and so on. So I wanted to finish with an example of a newly developed tool that has been built kind of using the information structure, which I think ties in really well with this idea of public good curation. So this is the publication facts label. As you can see, probably looks familiar because it's modeled on the nutrition facts label, this is the American version, but a version of this is found, I think, in pretty much every country at this point. And the idea of this is that it uses the information infrastructure to inform everybody, including the public, about how well an article and a journal adhere to information standards. So this isn't saying this is a good article or a bad article. This is saying this article has been peer reviewed. This article, the author has a conflict of interest. The data set is publicly available. So it's not, again, not passing a value judgment, but it is saying this has passed through a proper, rigorous publishing process, and therefore at that level, it can be deemed trustworthy, which I think is a really helpful way to for people to use the information infrastructure in a way that helps the public as well as researchers and others involved in the research endeavour. So thank you. I think I am passing on last but not least to Tracy.
Thank you very much, Alice, and thank you, everyone. I'm delighted that we've got this team of people together to talk about this today. I've absolutely loved working on this project. I've loved working with Sage. I've loved working with librarians and with others in the information infrastructure. I come at this from a slightly different place, which is from a public interest perspective. So I'm interested in what helps the public to weigh up claims and to find the information that's reliable. And I think there's a lot in the system of producing research evidence and sharing data and making collections available. There's a lot that goes on that people just don't know about. And it seemed to me that this a really exciting opportunity to lay some of that bare. And the first thing I would say is how difficult it was to find a language to describe what it is that people do. So that's one of the reasons why we started off with some workshops, because it's important, as people have said, because we don't talk much about the system that delivers us information. Although there's a technical language, people like Alice and Stephen and Martha know very well, we don't have a common public language to talk about these things. If you think we've now got all these phrases like misinformation, disinformation, and fakes and all these other words for fakes and lies. I don't know why lies has fallen out of use, but we don't seem to talk about lies anymore, and there's plenty of those around too. But the thing that concerns me is we don't have much of a public kind of presence. So I think it's time for us to build that, and I think we can. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes telling you why, from a campaigner point of view, I think that that's a very achievable task. So next slide, please. So the public good curators, we try to find some verbs that describe the thing that they do. As people have said, they encourage curiosity. They also provide skills and knowledge to aid understanding. So it's not just a case that we can, as a public, just pick up knowledge. We actually need other contextual knowledge to understand new bits of knowledge. We also need skills to make sense of things, to understand what it is we're looking at. And in some cases, we have to do a bit more work than that. So there's a whole lot of work, not only in providing us with those skills, but actually defining them and putting standards in place for some of those skills. They identify and inventory source material. And again, I think whilst when we start talking about libraries, I think for many members of the public, the mental picture of people flicking through a kind of an index. And in a sense, that is kind of what librarians and many others involved do. But they do it in a much more complex and sophisticated way and do things like they lead the creation of global standards. So that when you look up information in one place, you are doing it to the same standards and categorizations as you would in another place, and that systems talk to each other, collections can talk to each other, they can be found, that it's possible for us to search. So you think that Google's clever with all its indexing, but I can guarantee you that it would be, well, perhaps even more garbage than it sometimes is. It would be utter garbage if it wasn't for the incredible work that's already been done, actually, to label and categorize and collect group information and collections of knowledge and artifacts and all sorts of other things that it pulls upon. All that heavy thinking work, all that collaboration and social responsibility has already been taken. And the system that you use to interface with that is largely, not entirely, but largely actually pulling upon that work that's already been done and that responsibility taken. And I think, again, it's another area of invisibility because it seems so seamless. It seems so obvious that we should just be able to pick up and find a research paper on ovarian cancer. We forget that an awful lot was into actually just defining that, to giving it headings that we can find. So they also validate and evaluate information. And I think it's important to recognize Stephen's point about the about not being gatekeepers, but we also do need some sort of quality control. That doesn't mean that anyone stops us from reading what we want to read, but at least that help us to understand that we're not reading, I say, a peer-reviewed study, or that we're not reading something that we genuinely know was written by Picasso in his memoir. And so help us understand the caliber of that information, the authenticity, and all of those things that are important for us to know, as well as evaluating information and categorizing it. And inviting questioning, which might sound the same as encouraging curiosity, but I think others have made this point well, but this is more about the accountability side of it. It's never the end of the story to provide information. People who try to categorize things as you know, sort of Facebook has tried to sort of do a misinformation badge or this kind of thing, or not science, and this is science. I think that is so wooden and has no recourse when people question it and say, well, hold on a minute, it's just maybe that's going to become tomorrow, or is there any reason to think differently about that? Has been based on a really good study where numbers enough to make a conclusion. Those types of questions that need to be asked. And we also included in the guide and in our workshops leading up to it, lots of people who are part of that questioning, shaping those questions that we should ask, whether it's as a public, for example, the kind of people who report studies, experts, journalists, for example, who are a dying breed, unfortunately, but help to, you know, through their knowledge of a subject, help to ask the really pointed questions that we perhaps can't ask. So if they go to a press conference and somebody's presenting a paper with a big hype around some new discovery, they can actually say, is this really, you know, Richard Branson, are you really going to be taking people back and forwards to Mars? And that kind of thing. And they can ask sensible questions about that, where the rest of us might have some skepticism, but not know how to formulate a question. So formulating good questions is also something that we are helped along in doing. Next slide. In talking to public good curators, we tried many different ways of describing what they do. And we kind of know it when we see it. But I think one of the key things for me, from a public point of view, rather than thinking about the technical activities that people are undertaking or the principles, it's that they protect our pathways to trustworthy answers. And in the workshops talking to librarians in particular, the side of their work that actually is what was described by one librarian as a cornerstone of democracy. Libraries are a cornerstone of democracy. It really made me think also that we have no chance of things like equality in society if we don't have people protecting our pathways to information, if we don't have people providing us access. So that if, we grow up in a family where our dad was not a statistician or, our mum was not an oncologist, we actually do have a chance of finding out what, about those subjects. We do have a chance of making sense of the world because there are other pathways on offer to us. And I think that idea that in principle, we could all find a pathway to the same knowledge is something which is underwritten by libraries and their openness to all comers. Next slide, please. And it's particularly, I think, important to recognise that we are talking about this at a time when people have become really uncertain about what to trust, not just in political terms, but even affecting our scientific institutions. And it's gone so far as to say it isn't even any longer a question of people saying, do I trust science? Do I trust scientists, scientific information? Do I trust the academy that puts out, that accredits medical practitioners, for example? We live in a world where people are wondering whether the very story they're reading is even true itself. So we're talking so much more about it. And in the end, people start to step away from critical inquiry. They don't believe a load of rubbish, which I think sometimes it happens, but most of the time, people don't end up believing a lot of wrong-headed ideas. What they do is they believe very little. They become skeptical about everything and they step away from critical thinking. And because it's so hard to do, and it's so hard to know whether you're even reading a report that's true in some areas of reporting now, in particular things around what is going on in terms of things like government debt and things like that, that to get a true picture, people find it very, very difficult indeed. So I think we have to understand we're working in an environment which is deeply mistrustful and for good reason in some cases. And I think there is actually a hunger for ways in which we can start to work our way through that. And it's not realistic to say to people, actually, we're going to give you the skills, a kind of son of a rubbish detector, that you're going to be able to find out, you're going to work out whether something is a deep fake. I think there was a time when we thought that we could maybe do that. I remember Sense About Science helping politicians to spot deep fakes in one of our Evidence Week events. And we thought that we could give people the tools to avoid them having the wool pulled over their eyes. I think it's not realistic now. I don't think we can live in a buyer beware society. We have to live in a society that upholds and values and rewards behaviours and systems that do right for us as a public. And so this is what the context of public good curators is all about. Next slide, please. And perhaps for a lot of people, the pandemic was the moment when they realised that they do want to lean into systems and structures that they can rely upon. It doesn't mean we want to return to deference. As Stephen was saying, that questioning authority has had a lot of good things about it as well. But it does mean that people are very interested in the question of what serves the public well. So I think it's incredibly important for those of us who work in any way in the system to think about how we can start to answer that question meaningfully for people and help them to become far more acquainted with the bits of the system that do serve the public well, that have served the public well before, and to be together co-creating and thinking about how we create that for the modern age. And that's the mission that I want to put before you. Very briefly, next slide, I want to tell you why I think that Oh, so that's yes, let's help us build a voice. So we're going to jump forward again. And I want to tell you why I think it's possible to do. This isn't my first rodeo when it comes to getting out to the public and talking to them about what you might think are esoteric research practices and turning them into a mass campaign. This is I Don't Know What to Believe. It was the world's first public guide to peer review. And it started with what people experienced when they had lots and lots of different stories telling them there were breakthroughs and telling them that stem cells were a disaster and telling them that stem cells were amazing and telling them that, you know, all the usual stuff, chocolate cures cancer, chocolate causes cancer, all of that. So we worked with people to make sense of that system of peer review and to share with them what peer review was. And here we are, multiple translations later, millions and millions of copies have been downloaded. It's in everything from Portuguese to Mandarin. People have picked up and used the content and reused the content. In fact, this is an old version I used to show you on my screen because it mentions Blackwell Publishing and many other organizations that are no longer in existence. But we pulled together publishers, included Sage, in fact, and many others to think about how to talk more about peer review. And by talking more about peer review, by every time a scientist said when they spoke on the radio, this is my peer-reviewed study, what started to happen is that radio interviewers started to say, and is it
peer-reviewed, when they were interviewing somebody. Now, I'm saying this happened in a context where before this, I heard people talking about their studies where they were sort of pyramid selling magnets to protect you from the menopause. And they were being put on to a radio show, a very well-known radio show in the UK, actually, to talk about this study, which had never been published anywhere. And no one ever knew to actually question that in this way. So this became a new way of people interrogating. Actually, this isn't the same thing. When something is a scientific or research paper, scholarly paper, it's not the same thing as a piece of PR or marketing hype or a press release from a political party or a company. It is something different. This is a different kind of output, and we can ask about it. Politicians began to ask about it in relation to development of policy. Again, when I started out down this path, people were not even thinking about the quality of submissions to open government consultations and whether any of them that purported to offer research information were actually peer reviewed. It's now in school curriculum in the UK and elsewhere around the world. It's been introduced into news reporting standards. You'll now find very rare in a reputable media outlet for the paper not to be mentioned of the study. It was really normal 15 to 20 years ago to publish a finding without mentioning the journal where it was, and no one had any kind of breadcrumb trail to follow. So this was something that had so much popular appeal, and who would have thought it? Who would have thought that peer review is a phrase that ordinary people would get to use? Next slide, please. Well, that was a long-serving campaign. It's still going on. This is a short and hard-hitting campaign. It was 2 to 3 years. All trials involved tens of thousands of patients, consumers, doctors, and other clinicians and researchers around the world, publishers, people in the librarians were very big on this one too. And we got together to say, actually, it's high time that everyone who runs a clinical trial publishes the results. We need to stop this situation where people are being harmed by being put through repeat trials because no one knew that the trial had already been run previously. So we were facing a situation around the world where fewer than half of clinical trials were being published on the medicines that we use today. And we're now in a situation where in the most research intensive countries, because of this campaign, we have new regulations in Europe. We have new regulations in the UK. We have the FDA enforcing its 2007 FDA Amendment Act, which it had ignored before, and fining companies for failing to publish. At least that was the case until very recently. I think things are changing a little. But this is all on the back of the public support, the researchers and the public being together and saying we want better. And so incredibly valuable. And then let's skip a couple of slides. Okay.
I just wanted to highlight the fact that we even involve people who are very skeptical and minded to conspiracy theories in this work. And then we come to our final slide. Our final slide. So what you can do, invite, literally just really practical things. Invite a curator to speak in your environment. All of you belong to things. So you belong to universities, you belong to institutions, you belong to professional bodies, learning bodies. You have, in some cases, your students and you have student societies. Invite a curator to speak about their work. Mention this process of curation. Mention every way in which, if you have an ORCID ID, use it. If you are using the services of a library, accredit that, mention the process, share the guide. You can do that very easily through this QR code. And above all, tell people when you appreciate what they do. Morale is a really good way of holding people in public service. And everything that you can do to remind people that they're doing something that you appreciate will help them to do it for that bit longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and thank you to all of our speakers. We're going to go into a Q&A shortly, but beforehand, I wanted to flag that we have some upcoming webinars for anyone who's interested in enjoying today's conversation. Next week, we're doing a webinar called Amplifying Voices, and we're going to have 3 different speakers talking about strategies for early career Black scholars. In mid-April, we'll have a webinar on topics around neurodiversity and academia. And at the end of April, on the 22nd, we'll have a webinar about doing publicly impactful research, particularly on how to have research that has an impact on UN SDGs. Just wrapping it up to quickly say that we have a hub on Sage's website, the Information for Authors Hub, for any support you need on the publishing process. And I will note that after today's presentation, we will send slides, a certificate of attendance, and also a link to download the guide we're talking about today. So first, I think to get us situated, I'm wondering if each of our panelists can talk a little bit, or if you could highlight a part of the guide that particularly sticks out to you, or maybe a viewpoint that you're most interested in.
Shall I start? It's a great guide. By the way, I think I hope will be very, very widely read. As Tracy says, Sense About Science's work really does have an impact, and you all can be part of that with this. The quote that stuck out to me is Janicki, who's the Deputy Director for Public Policy and Advocacy at the ALA, the American Library Association. And she said, when we talk about access to information, we're also talking about the essential ability to independently and critically analyze and evaluate information and sources. Access to information is a basic right, but information literacy is what fosters opportunity. And I love that. I especially love it being at the conference I'm at the moment, where this has come up quite a lot, with librarians in particular expressing concern about kind of AI rotting people's ability to question and to research in ways that are thoughtful. But I think that there is a real challenge here for all of us in terms of not just getting access to information, knowing that it's been well curated, but also knowing how to use it, knowing what to look out for, knowing how to check whether it's valid and that kind of thing. So I really like that quote a lot.
Well, I'll jump in next. I suppose the quote that sort of resonated quite well came from Leo S. Lowe, who's the Dean of Libraries and University Librarian and advisor to the Provost for AI Literacy at the University of Virginia. And in particular, he talks a little bit about AI coming in, how it reshapes how things work, but the fact that really what we need is, he says, this combination of human judgment and digital fluency will be critical for a healthy information ecosystem, because I certainly feel with AI, there's a very quick rush to make value judgments about it. Whereas ultimately, the problem is the minute that we start making value judgments, we start sort of missing out on what it can bring, or assessing things differently. Whereas ultimately, we just need to see it as a tool, and it's a tool that needs to be used expertly, and it doesn't replace human judgment either. So not falling for the advertising or the fear mongering, but just seeing it is a dumb tool.
I really like this quote from Elaine Westbrook in the guide. And the quote is, "Libraries are champions for intellectual freedom. And so we are all about people coming in, reading whatever they want, studying whatever they want, forming opinions in their own right. We don't discriminate on what people want to read. We want people to read and to be able to freely choose what they read." I think that quote is so powerful because it does two things. One, it sort of acknowledges the kind of inherent bias of information and those delivering it without letting that fact kind of scare off or discourage the pursuit of that information. And second, sort of addresses this other function of the public good curator that I think it was Stephen sort of mentioned earlier, as someone who encourages curiosity, someone who can kind of free people of the preconceived notions they arrive with, and without prejudgment, which I think is kind of a very human requirement. And sort of reminds me of that old adage of needing to empty your cup before you can fill it up. If you are someone who is guarding what's in your cup, you may need someone there who can kind of gently walk you through draining it before you refill it. So that one really spoke to me.
And I'll just add really briefly to that Munira Silk's comment, which I flagged up but didn't go through, which is just reminded us that during the pandemic, she was casting around looking for a place to find research information, someone to kind of steady her in making sense of drinking from that fire hose. And to pick up Heather Love's question, actually, in the discussion about will we see more support, I actually thought the pandemic might help us. Or might help decision makers and resource decisions to go much more in favor of people who provide that kind of work. But instead, I think we've just seen so many initiatives, but often excluding the very people that we're talking about now, or not thinking about how to use them. Whereas researchers and librarians really showed during the pandemic how actually essential just one relationship can be for members of the public to grab onto when they're trying to make sense of the world.
Great. Thank you so much, all. Before we move to the next question, I do want to talk about the poll that we started at the beginning of today's webinar and wrap up with another one. Overall, I would say the scores are pretty good. The question was, how positive do you think the outlook is for information neutrality? We're sitting pretty much square in the middle. We have 31% of people rating it a 3 out of 5. We have a smaller 6% at 1, and we have a higher 22 at 5. So that seems more positive. I'm actually going to send another poll now to see if maybe today's chat has impacted your feelings on this. So another poll is outcoming. But my next question for the panel today: how do you feel public good institutions earn the trust of a skeptical public?
I guess I can start off on that one because I think, and I can certainly speak from the place of libraries, which have traditionally benefited quite strongly from a sense of trust amongst the population, even as other institutions have tended to fall back, yet which at the same time have increasingly found themselves under attack from people who simply don't believe in the idea that everyone should be able to have access and should be able to make up their own minds. The way that libraries have tended to focus on this, I think, underlining having that professional independence is an important one. Staying clear of any obvious link to any obvious control by politics is an important factor. I think that readiness to be open. There's some fantastic work that ALA, the American Library Association, has done about it's building up policies, it's displaying policies, it's making sure you're actually bringing people into some of those discussions where you explain about the choices that you make, the focus that you give, the investments that you actually make, and being ready to take those questions and to answer them. And so I think investing in that, being very transparent, being very obvious about what you're doing is a positive. It's a positive thing, and in most countries it seems to work. But I think, as said, there's a limit clearly to how far you can go if people simply don't believe that access to information is important. If people don't believe that readers, that researchers should be autonomous in what they choose to look at and to look across the board, then we have more of a problem, clearly.
If I could just jump in on that related to this, I think there's questions from Gregor and James and Fatima in the feed that I've picked up, which all go to the sort of question of skepticism and asking people maybe to believe things that they shouldn't believe. That are we asking people to trust too much in peer-reviewed research when it can be wrong, for example? And I think we have to distinguish between infrastructure and the principles and the accountability of those, and the content and the conclusions that you come to. So I think we can campaign to have a good public infrastructure where we ask people to respond, to answer to certain standards, such as editorial standards. We doesn't mean we have to wait for the day when every editor abides by every single standard, in a completely unimpeachable way. And so I think that we have to be careful not to try and ask for this sort of perfection in content or content that we agree with when we're looking at this. I think the key thing here is access to information and understanding what status it has, where it came from, how it's formulated, how to find it in the first place, how to validate it. Those are the key things for us to understand. And there's no reason for us not to trust in those, because in the sense that we can trust in a principle and then understand that it's not always just like justice. We adhere to justice without and recognize that sometimes we have miscarriages.
Yeah, great point. Thank you, Tracy. I see a number of questions coming through about AI. So I'm going to pull from particularly from Vanessa's question, if I can, for our panel. So Vanessa's asked, how can you make your role as a public good curator and research more visible and institutionally recognized, especially in the face of growing reliance on AI and algorithms to filter and circulate scientific knowledge?
Can I have a... Sorry, Stephen, did you want to go?
You go first. I've spoken.
Well, I have a very simple response. I think a very simple response to that, which is like a broken record, use your ORCID record, because that's a really great place to list all your service efforts, whether it's peer review or organising a conference or being a member of a society, whatever it might be. And increasingly, that information is being used by, for example, funders and others to evaluate work. And I think there's a general movement in favour of making research evaluation not just about the literal research outputs, but about the other forms of service that you perform for your community. So use your ORCID record.
I think just building on that is certainly the efforts of initiatives such as Quora to push for a more holistic approach to research assessment and to evaluating, to valuing the roles, the work that researchers carry out. And so I simply just to put a name to what Alice has already mentioned, to echo this, to make clear, to get involved in those processes and underline that we do need to look to value these other roles that help us avoid a public goods problem.
Yes, thank you. If I actually can, I have a related question here about AI. So, or on a similar theme. So somebody's asked, if we see AI mainly as a tool, at what point in curation does human judgment still matter the most? And when you say digital fluency, what skills should curators focus on first?
Just to start things off, a really important one is when to use AI. I think just going through that process and assessing, like, is this a valid time to use AI, or is this something where I actually need to understand where this information has come from and how the choices have been made? As that's a crucial weakness in AI, is that lack of transparency.
Yeah, I find this kind of difficult. I'm not I'm afraid I'm a slight AI Luddite, just because I think it produces so many hallucinations and it presents everything in a way that appears very authoritative. And then again, in session this morning, somebody from Crossref was saying one of the big problems they have now is, AI, GPT, or whatever, creating false DOIs, which for articles that don't exist, and then they get emails from students saying, "Help! My professor says he's going to fail me if I can't produce a citation for this, and it's not working. What is it?" And they're like, "Well, citation for it because it doesn't exist. So sorry, you're probably going to fail your course." But so I find it hard. I feel like there's certainly things that AI tools can do for us, but I think humans in the loop as early and probably often as possible is still needed at this point.
I think there are amazing things that AI can do. I mean, an infant dosage calculator, for example, has been beyond our ability to pull together because of the complexity of the literature and the statistics and everything else that's involved in that. So there are incredible things it can do. And in terms of just taking the load of sorting through things like, which of these many, many plants might grow into the kind of plant that we're trying to grow in our wheat field. But I think we over-exaggerate. And we use these human terms like thinking. Well, in fact, Gemini uses thinking and humanizes itself. It's not thinking. It's a shame we call it intelligence, and it's not novel insight in the sense of those ideas are not generated. What's generated is the basis for those ideas. And so I think we have to be a bit careful of accrediting human AI with the human intelligence that's gone into formulating the questions and the search terms and everything else. So long as we use it intelligently ourselves, then I think it's a great tool, but it is just a tool. And as with a hammer, if you use it to clean your windows, you soon start smashing windows. So a tool is not for everything, and let's think carefully about where we use it.
That's excellent. I think actually that is a very nice, well, a good way for us to end today's conversation. I think that's very helpful. I will say that our poll came back. Our numbers are looking better. So we have 4 is our main, 41% of people say the outlook is moving toward positive. So kudos to our panel today for really helping nudge people along toward feeling positive about this. So I want to thank everyone for joining. Everyone who is joining, again, we will follow up in an email with a certificate, the recording, the slides, all of that good stuff. And a huge thank you to our speakers today, to Alice, Tracy, Stephen, and Martha. Really appreciate your insights, and I hope to see everybody in a future webinar. Thank you.